Sarah Langston, a young widow, faces cruelty in New Carolina, shunned by her community while seeking shelter for her sick daughter, Lily. Soaked by rain, rejected by stores, and humiliated online, Sarah's quiet resilience hides her pain. That night, a mysterious box with military-grade supplies appears, hinting at unseen allies. As rumors fester and her job is lost, military vehicles suddenly surround her home. Led by Staff Sergeant Luke Hart, who owes his life to Sarah's late husband, they form a protective encampment. Why are they here? What justice will they demand for Sarah's suffering? Subscribe to uncover tales of quiet kindness that transform lives. Your support helps us share stories that inspire hope and honor resilience. Be part of our community, type "still human," and subscribe for more heart-touching narratives. The rain came down in relentless sheets, soaking Sarah Langston and her 2-year-old daughter, Lily, as they stood exposed on the sidewalk. Sarah's thin jacket, already worn from years of use, offered little protection against the storm's fury. She pulled it tighter around herself and her crying baby, her arms trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of shielding Lily from the world's cruelty. At 28, Sarah was no stranger to hardship. The memory of her husband, Staff Sergeant David Langston, lingered like a bruise on her heart. 2 years ago, military officers had knocked on her door, their faces grim as they delivered the news that David would not return from his third deployment. That moment had shattered the fragile hope she'd nurtured in their modest wooden home on the outskirts of New Carolina. Once, that house had been a sanctuary, a place where she and David dreamed of raising a family, its walls filled with the promise of laughter and love. Now it was a quiet refuge where Sarah clung to her dignity through small, deliberate acts, sewing clothes for neighbors, tending her vegetable garden, and leaving scraps for the stray dog that had appeared like a ghost after David's funeral, its mournful eyes mirroring her own unspoken grief. The 3-mile trek into town hadn't been part of her plan. Lily's fever had spiked the night before, burning through their last dose of children's medicine and leaving their supply of baby formula dangerously low. Sarah's ancient pickup truck, unreliable even on good days, had refused to start in the morning's biting chill. With no other choice, she'd bundled Lily against her chest, wrapping her in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, and set out on foot. The rain started halfway through their journey, a gentle mist at first that quickly turned into a punishing downpour. By the time they reached Miller's gas station, both were drenched, their clothes clinging to their skin like a second, heavier burden. Sarah's dark hair plastered itself to her face, and Lily's soft whimpers grew louder, each cry piercing her mother's heart. Sarah approached the gas station's glass door, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "Could we please wait inside until the storm passes?" she asked the attendant, a young man whose eyes barely lifted from his phone. "My baby's getting cold." The words hung in the air, a quiet plea born of desperation. The attendant didn't bother to meet her gaze. "Customers only," he muttered, his tone flat. "Buy something or move along." Sarah's fingers fumbled in her pocket, producing a crumpled $5 bill, her emergency money, saved for moments like this. "A small carton of milk, please," she said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "We're out," he replied, though Sarah's eyes caught the glint of milk cartons in the refrigerated section behind him. The truth settled over her like a familiar ache. This wasn't about milk or store policy. It was about her, the quiet widow on Oak Ridge Road, the woman the town had decided to cast out. For months, whispers had slithered through New Carolina, poisoning the air around her. Rumors painted her as a hoarder of government handouts, a woman putting on airs with her homeschooling and her neatly tended garden. They didn't see the nights she stayed up late, stitching clothes under a dim lamp to earn a few extra dollars, or the way she stretched at every penny to keep Lily fed and warm. They didn't know about the morning she woke with a tightness in her chest, wondering how she'd make it through another day without David's steady presence. Sarah stepped back into the rain, Lily's cries growing more frantic against her chest. She tried the convenience store next, hoping for a shred of kindness, but was met with a wall of hostility. The heavy-set security guard loomed in the doorway, his hand resting on his belt as if daring her to argue. "We don't serve your kind here," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Get out of here now." Through the store's windows, Sarah saw customers watching, some with uneasy glances, others with a gleam of vindictive satisfaction. No one spoke up. No one offered a hand or even a word of acknowledgement. In that moment, Sarah felt the weight of their silence, as cold and unyielding as the rain soaking her to the bone. She found temporary shelter beneath a store awning across the street, sitting on the edge of a concrete planter. Cradling Lily close, she used her body to shield her daughter from the wind's sharp bite. Her backpack, worn and fraying at the seams, held the last packet of formula and an empty bottle. With no clean water to mix it, Sarah cupped her hand, catching rainwater in her palm. Her movements were careful, almost reverent, as she prepared the bottle, her focus entirely on the task of keeping her daughter fed. Each drop of rainwater felt like a small defiance against the world's indifference, a quiet act of love in a storm that seemed determined to break her. She didn't notice the military jeep pulling into a parking space 50 yards away, nor the soldier inside who watched her with a growing sense of recognition and concern. His eyes lingered on the young mother, her head bowed over her child, and something in his chest tightened, a flicker of shame for a world that could turn its back on someone so clearly in need. That evening, a video surfaced on New Carolina's community Facebook page, its cruelty amplified by the digital glow of countless screens. It showed Sarah mixing formula with rainwater, her face etched with quiet determination. The caption, dripping with mock concern, labeled her a welfare queen, an irresponsible mother who dared to burden the town with her presence. The security guard had filmed it, his voice in the background sneering about how she tried to force her way into the store. By morning, the digital whispers had hardened into something uglier, their venom seeping into the real world. Sarah's part-time job at the elementary school, where she read to kindergartners twice a week, was terminated with a curt text from the principal. Due to community concerns, it read, the words vague but cutting. Sarah set her phone face down on the kitchen table, her movements slow and deliberate as she continued making Lily's breakfast. The fever had broken overnight, a small mercy in a sea of indignities, and Sarah clung to that fragile victory. She didn't let herself dwell on the loss of the job or the way the town's judgment seemed to close in around her like a tightening noose. Outside, the morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden. A handwritten sign hammered into her front lawn, its message stark and brutal. Not welcome. Sarah stood before it, her expression unreadable, though inside her heart churned with a quiet storm of anger and resignation. She studied the sign for several moments, as if memorizing its cruelty, before calmly pulling it from the ground. Later, neighbors would notice smoke rising from her burn barrel, the sign reduced to ash, a silent act of defiance that spoke louder than words. By afternoon, Lily's medicine was running dangerously low, and Sarah's resolve was tested once more. She moved through the motions of her day with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through 2 years of grief, but beneath it, a question lingered. How much more could she endure before the weight of it all broke her? The evening air hung heavy with the scent of damp grass as Sarah stood in her front yard, her hand raised in a hopeful wave toward Mrs. Caldwell, her neighbor across the way. Once they'd shared more than just pleasantries. Mrs. Caldwell would bring over baskets of zucchini and tomatoes from her garden, her smile as warm as the summer sun. But today, like so many days before, Mrs. Caldwell's eyes darted away, her steps quickening as if Sarah's very existence was an inconvenience. The sting of rejection pierced Sarah's chest, a familiar ache that had settled there since the town began to turn its back on her. She swallowed hard, her throat tight with unspoken questions. What had she done? Why was she suddenly invisible? Inside, her daughter Lily slept soundly in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with the innocence only a child could carry. It's just you and me, little one, Sarah whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the quiet house. The words were a comfort, a promise to her daughter and herself, though they did little to ease the loneliness that clung to her like a second skin. As dusk painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, a sharp knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Her heart thudded, a mix of curiosity and caution urging her forward. She crept to the door, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the knob as she peered through the peephole. Nothing. No one stood on the porch, no shadow moved in the fading light. Only a plain cardboard box rested on her welcome mat, its presence both ordinary and unsettling. Sarah hesitated, her pulse quickening as she scanned the empty road beyond her property. The rural stretch of their home, usually so quiet, felt alive with unseen eyes. She cracked the door open, just enough to snatch the box inside, then locked it again with a trembling hand. Back in the safety of her kitchen, she tore open the package, her breath catching at the contents. Military-grade infant formula, the kind not found on any civilian shelf, alongside fever reducers, children's antibiotics, and a small, worn military patch embroidered with the insignia of her husband David's unit. Her fingers traced the patch, the fabric rough against her skin, stirring a flood of memories. David's proud smile when he'd first shown it to her, the way he'd promised to always come home. Beneath the supplies lay a handwritten note, the words simple yet piercing. For Lily, thank you. The handwriting wasn't David's. She'd know his sharp, slanted script anywhere. This was someone else's hand, someone who knew her daughter's name and her needs with a precision that sent a chill down her spine. That night, Sarah double-checked every lock, a precaution she rarely took in their remote corner of the world. The silence of the house felt heavier now, laced with questions she couldn't answer. She moved to Lily's room, her daughter's feverish warmth easing under the mysterious medicine from the box. Sarah sat by the crib, her hand resting lightly on Lily's back, her mind racing. Who left this? Wit, the patch, the supplies, the note. It was as if someone was watching over them, but the thought brought no comfort, only a gnawing unease. Morning broke with a thick fog blanketing the ground, softening the edges of the world outside. Sarah's routine held steady despite the strangeness of the night before. She stepped onto the back porch, a chipped ceramic bowl in hand, filled with scraps for the stray German shepherd who had become her silent companion. Here, boy, she called softly, her voice carrying into the mist. The dog emerged from the tree line, his muscular frame moving with cautious grace. For months he'd come every morning, his amber eyes meeting hers with a quiet understanding. But today, something was different. His head was high, ears pricked, his body taut with alertness. He ignored the bowl, instead pressing close to Sarah's side, his gaze fixed on the woods. A low growl rumbled in his chest and Sarah's stomach tightened. What is it, boy? She murmured, her own senses sharpening. Then she heard it, the low, unmistakable hum of engines, multiple vehicles approaching on the dirt road that rarely saw traffic. Her heart lurched as she scooped Lily from her play blanket on the porch, clutching her daughter close. The sound grew louder, a synchronized roar that spoke of military precision. Over the hill, an olive-drab Humvee appeared, followed by another, then another, until 12 vehicles formed a perimeter around her modest home. Soldiers, at least 30, disembarked with disciplined efficiency, their boots crunching on the gravel. Sarah's grip on Lily tightened, her mind spiraling with fear and confusion. What was happening? Was this a threat? From the lead vehicle, a tall man stepped forward, his staff, sergeant stripes, catching the morning light. His face tugged at a distant memory, familiar yet elusive, like a name on the tip of her tongue. Mrs. Langston, he said, removing his cap with a respectful nod. I'm Staff Sergeant Luke Hart. I serve with David. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a weight that mirrored her own. If you believe doing what's right, even when no one's watching, is still worth doing, type still human. For sometimes the seeds of kindness grow into unexpected forests of support. The words hung in the air, cryptic yet profound, and Sarah's breath caught as he continued. 4 years ago, your husband saved my life. Yesterday, I saw how this town treated his family. He gestured to the convoy, now transforming her property into an improvised camp. Tents were rising in neat rows, a field kitchen taking shape, soldiers moving with quiet purpose. We'd like to stay a while if that's all right with you, just until folks around here remember what respect looks like. Sarah stood frozen, her emotions a tangled storm of relief, gratitude, and disbelief. The town's coldness had left her feeling like a ghost in her own community, but now here was a stranger, a man tied to David's past, offering not just protection, but a reminder that her husband's goodness lived on. She nodded, unable to find words, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. By dawn the next day, her property was unrecognizable. Where once there had been only her small home and an overgrown yard, now stood a military encampment, orderly and purposeful. Tents formed concentric rings around the house, their canvas flapping softly in the breeze. Soldiers worked with quiet efficiency. Some serviced vehicles. Others cleared brush or repaired her sagging fence. The air hummed with their presence, a strange comfort after months of isolation. In town, whispers spread like wildfire. The mayor, his collar damp with nervous sweat, called an emergency council meeting, demanding answers no one could provide. By mid-morning, a delegation of town officials decided to confront the situation themselves. Their three-car procession rolled towards Sarah's property, slowing as they spotted two soldiers standing at parade rest by the driveway. "This is Mayor Wilson," the lead official called through his car window, his voice edged with authority and unease. "We need to speak with whoever's in charge here." Sergeant Hart emerged from the command tent, his stride unhurried, his expression calm but unyielding. "What's the meaning of this occupation?" the mayor sputtered, his face flushed. Hart's response was measured, almost amused. "Annual training exercise, sir, rural community integration and support operations, all on private property, with full permission." He produced a folder of official-looking documents, their crisp pages silencing the mayor's protests. "Everything's in order," Hart said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah watched from her porch, Lily in her arms, the German shepherd still at her side. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that she wasn't alone. The soldiers, the supplies, Hart's words, they were a testament to David's legacy, a reminder that even in a world that turned its back, there were still those who remembered what it meant to stand up for what was right. At the invitation of Sarah Langston, a small military unit had set up camp on her property in New Carolina, tasked with providing infrastructure support and community engagement training. The operation was unconventional, and the mayor was quick to point out its irregularity, his voice tinged with skepticism as he confronted Sergeant Hart. But Hart stood firm, his expression calm yet unyielding, a flicker of steel in his eyes betraying the weight of his words. "What's truly irregular," he countered, "is the way Mrs. Langston was treated yesterday." His tone remained steady, but the mention of a video, evidence of the town's recent cruelty towards Sarah, carried a quiet intensity. Hart revealed that his commanding officer had taken a keen interest in the footage, a fact that hung heavily in the air, unspoken but understood. As the exchange unfolded, Sarah stepped out of her modest home, her young daughter Lily perched confidently on her hip. Her presence was a grounding force, her voice soft but resolute as she declared, "These men and women are my guests. They're welcome here for as long as they choose to stay." There was no trace of anger or defiance in her words, only a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her core. Sarah had endured loss, rejection, and judgment, yet she carried herself with a dignity that made the mayor shift uncomfortably. For her, this moment wasn't about proving a point. It was about standing in her truth, protecting the space she had carved out for herself and her daughter. By that afternoon, an extraordinary shift began to unfold. The town, which had so recently turned its back on Sarah, seemed to awaken to its own conscience. First came Mrs. Caldwell, her arms cradling a warm, freshly baked pie, her face flushed with a mixture of guilt and sincerity. She stumbled through an apology, her words halting but earnest, as if she were trying to piece together the fragments of her own regret. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable but kind, accepting the gesture with the same grace she'd shown when facing the town's earlier scorn. Next, the pharmacist appeared, clutching Lily's prescription, miraculously found in the system after months of delays. His hands trembled slightly as he handed it over, avoiding Sarah's gaze, as though the weight of his prior indifference pressed heavily on him. The elementary school principal was next, his polished shoes scuffing the dirt path to Sarah's door. He offered to reinstate her reading program, which had been unceremoniously cut despite its impact on the town's children. His words were formal, but beneath them lay an unspoken acknowledgement of the wrong he'd helped perpetuate. Most surprising of all was the convenience store owner, a man who had once barred Sarah from his shop with a security guard at his side. Now he arrived alone, his truck loaded with groceries and supplies. A donation, he called it, though the word felt thin compared to the truth. It was atonement, plain and simple, and everyone present knew it. Sarah accepted each offering with the same quiet dignity, her responses free of judgment or triumph. She didn't gloat or rebuke. She simply nodded, her heart heavy with the complexity of human failings and the faint hope of redemption. As the day drew to a close, Hart approached Sarah with the results of his unit's efforts. Her truck, battered and unreliable for months, now gleamed with fresh repairs. The leaking roof that had plagued her small home was patched, its shingles neatly aligned. Her garden, once a modest patch of vegetables, had been expanded into a thriving plot capable of sustaining her and Lily. But the most significant gift came in a simple folder Hart handed her. Inside were details of veterans' benefits she'd never been properly informed of, educational support for Lily, health coverage Sarah had long assumed was out of reach, and other resources that should have been hers by right. Sarah's fingers trembled as she leafed through the pages, her mind racing with the implications. For 2 years she had struggled alone, piecing together a life for herself and her daughter after the death of her husband, David. The weight of those years pressed against her chest, a quiet ache of grief and resilience. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes searching Hart's face for answers. "It's been 2 years." Hart's expression softened, but there was a raw honesty in his gaze as he explained. "I was recovering from my own injuries when David deployed that final time," he said, his voice thick with the memory of a wound that wasn't just physical. "By the time I was back on duty, he was gone. I lost track of you until yesterday when I saw that video. I recognized you immediately." He gestured to the soldiers around them, men and women who had volunteered for this unofficial mission. "Every one of them either served with David or knows what he did. We live by a code. Nobody gets left behind. That includes families." His words landed softly but carried the weight of a promise kept, a debt honored. Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat, not just for herself, but for the man she'd loved, whose absence still echoed in every corner of her life. A week later, the military presence departed as swiftly and precisely as it had arrived. The tents were dismantled, the vehicles rolled out in disciplined formation, and the temporary community that had formed around Sarah's home dissolved. But its impact lingered. At the entrance to her property stood a handcrafted wooden sign, its letters carefully carved. Zone Lily. It was a testament to the silent kindness that had transformed her home, a place now marked by the quiet strength of compassion. Beneath the words was the insignia of David's unit, a permanent reminder of the bonds that tied these soldiers to her husband, even in his absence. The physical changes remained as well, a sturdy roof, a reliable truck, a garden that promised sustenance. But the invisible changes ran deeper: restored benefits, an educational trust for Lily, and medical coverage that felt like a lifeline Sarah hadn't dared hope for. Sarah's daily life resumed its familiar rhythm, but it was subtly transformed. She resumed teaching reading to local children, now in the warmth of her own home, rather than the school that had rejected her. Her garden flourished, yielding enough to share with neighbors who had rediscovered their capacity for generosity. A stray German shepherd, now named Scout, had claimed Andrea Sarah had woven herself into the fabric of her community, not through grand gestures or loud proclamations, but through the quiet, steady rhythm of her kindness. The people around her had become more than neighbors or acquaintances. They were her chosen family, bound by ties that ran deeper than blood, forged in the crucible of shared compassion. Her actions, small and unassuming, carried a weight that rippled far beyond her own awareness. One day, a photograph captured a moment that would change how the world saw her. It wasn't a staged portrait or a carefully curated snapshot, but a candid glimpse of Sarah's heart in action. Her gentle smile as she handed a warm meal to someone in need, her eyes soft with empathy. That image found its way onto social media, spreading not with the fleeting frenzy of a meme or the sting of mockery, but with a rare, reverent energy. It was shared with admiration, each repost carrying the hashtag Silent Heroes, a tribute to those who give without fanfare. The comments overflowed with stories of similar unsung acts, as if Sarah's moment had unlocked a collective gratitude for the quiet goodness in the world. Sarah herself felt a mix of humility and unease as the image gained traction. She hadn't sought recognition. Her kindness wasn't a performance. It was simply who she was, a reflex as natural as breathing. Yet deep down, she couldn't deny the warmth that bloomed in her chest, knowing her actions had touched others. She wondered with a flicker of doubt if the attention might change how people saw her, or worse, how she saw herself. But she pushed the thought aside, choosing instead to focus on the next person she could help, the next small way she could make a difference. The power of her silent compassion lay in its consistency, even when the world seemed to turn its back. There were days when her kindness was met with indifference or even rejection, moments when a sharp word or a cold glance could have easily dimmed her spirit. But Sarah carried on, her resolve unshaken. She didn't demand fairness or retribution. She simply chose to keep giving, to keep caring, even when it hurt. Her heart ached at times, heavy with the weight of unreturned gestures. But she held fast to the belief that kindness was its own reward, a seed planted in faith that it might one day grow. Unbeknownst to her, one of those seeds had taken root years ago in the heart of a soldier. He had been a broken man when Sarah met him, haunted by memories of war, adrift in a world that felt foreign and unforgiving. She hadn't known his story then, only that he needed a meal, a kind word, a moment of human connection. Her simple act of care, a warm coffee pressed into his trembling hands, a quiet conversation on a park bench, had been a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge. He carried that memory like a talisman, a reminder that there was still good in the world, still reason to keep going. Now, years later, seeing her face in that viral photo, his heart swelled with gratitude and resolve. Sarah's quiet kindness had saved him, and he would not let her light go unnoticed. The soldier wasn't alone in his reverence. Across the community, others began to step forward, inspired by Sarah's example. Her actions, so small in the moment, cast long shadows, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. A neighbor who had once dismissed her as naive began to volunteer at the same shelter, moved by the photo and the realization that kindness could be a quiet revolution. A young girl, scrolling through her phone, saw the #SilentHeroes and decided to write a thank you note to her teacher, who had always believed in her. Each act, sparked by Sarah's example, became a thread in a tapestry of change, weaving together a community that had forgotten how to pause and see one another. In a world that often roared with chaos, where outrage and division dominated the airwaves, Sarah's silence was a radical act. It cut through the noise like a whisper that demanded to be heard. Her story reminded people that change didn't always come from grand speeches or viral stunts, but from the steady, unseen work of those who chose to do what was right, even when no one was watching. Her kindness was a catalyst, a spark that ignited a chain reaction of goodness, proving that the smallest gestures could echo across generations. And so, the image of Sarah continued to spread, not just as a fleeting post, but as a symbol of hope. It was a reminder that every act of kindness, no matter how small, was a seed sown into the world. Some might never bloom in our lifetime, but others might grow into something extraordinary, a line of soldiers standing in silent salute, a community transformed by the courage to care. Sarah's heart, though quiet, beat with a resonance that touched countless others, proving that those who live with kindness are never truly forgotten. Her story was a testament to the power of silent heroes, whose actions speak louder than words ever could. It was a call to keep going, to keep giving, even when the world seems blind to your efforts. Because someday, somewhere, the seeds you've planted might blossom into a legacy of love, a quiet revolution that changes the world, one heart at a time.